you'll raise your right hand. Swear to tell the truth. Other one. Swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. Thank you. If you have a seat, if you'll speak up into that smaller microphone, that'll help me hear. If you'll tell me your first name and last name and spell them both.
Kevin Culling, Kevinculling.
Thank you. Questions?
Yes, sir. Mr. Culling, I believe you grew up in Texas. Is that right?
I was born in Texas.
Born
I
in
grew
Texas.
Up here.
Grew up in Murfreesboro.
Yes, sir.
And where did you go to high school?
Riverdale High School.
And after high school, what did you do? What were your next endeavors?
I went to EMT school after that.
When you go to EMT school, what are you doing? What are you taking and what do you learn?
It's basic studies for emergency medical technician. And after I completed that course, tried to find employment in that field. Discussions I had with people, basically I needed to, let's say, get some life experience before I delved into that any further. So that's what I did. About 4 or 5 years later, I went back to EMT school, went through the program again, and then shortly after that got hired on with Rutherford County Emergency Medicine.
Okay. Do you remember what year it was that you got hired on with Rutherford County?
September of 1988.
Okay. And can you tell us, other than the EMT school, have you had any other training, education experience that helps you do your job?
Paramedic school was at Ball State Community College in Gallatin, and I went there for approximately a year, 16 months, somewhere around there.
Are you a paramedic?
Yes, sir, I am.
And can you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what a paramedic is?
Paramedic is a first responder to pre-hospital medical emergencies. We're the ones who go to the car wrecks, to the house calls for the heart attacks, those sort of things. We basically, we're the first line of defense for any emergency medical problems that occur outside the hospital.
Now, where are you employed at this particular time?
With Middle Tennessee Medical Center.
And is that here in Murfreesboro?
Yes, sir, it's here in Murfreesboro.
Okay. I want to take you back now to March the 2nd, 2011. Did you respond, or were you dispatched to the Raiders Crossing Apartments?
Yes, sir.
And you remember what time it was approximately, if you recall?
Approximately, it was just a few minutes before 7 o'clock, best of my knowledge.
Okay. And can you tell me how long it took you to get there, approximately?
Approximately 4 or 5 minutes. Our station on Rutherford Boulevard was not that far from the Hazelwood location.
When you arrived at that location, had you been given any information that would prepare you on what you needed to do once you got there?
Best of my recollection, we were dispatched to an assault initially. When we arrived on the scene, there were several patrol cars and fire apparatus. I don't remember if one of the officers on the scene made mention of it or whether our dispatcher made mention of it, but just as about the time I got there, either as I exited the truck or right before I exited the truck, I remember somebody saying that CPR was in progress.
Okay. So when you got out of your truck, were you alone or with somebody?
No, I had a partner with me.
And who was that?
James Peters.
Okay. And what roles did each of y'all play in this particular situation? What did you do as opposed to what he would do? I'll make it easy for you. What'd you do?
James is an EMT.
Okay.
I was the paramedic. My role and responsibility was to do some of the higher level care, and it was at that point in time in that incident was to manage her airway, which included putting down an endotracheal tube into her trachea and making sure that her airway was open and it was patent.
Okay.
And that was my main role at that point in time.
And is that what you did once you got there?
Once we got upstairs, yes.
Now, when you had gotten there, had the AED already been hooked up?
Yes, sir, it had.
And were you given any information concerning the AED by any of the other medical people?
The firefighters that were there who were doing CPR and had already placed the AED on the victim told me that the prompts on the AED had never advised shock. So that means the AED did not detect either one of the two rhythms that it's programmed to detect in order to deliver that shock.
Would it, just to put it in layman's terms, does it check for a heartbeat?
Not to any great extent. It examines or it looks for two certain heart rhythms that are what we call shockable rhythms.
Okay. And the rhythm is basically established by one beat and then another beat, another beat,
That's
another
correct.
beat, another beat.
That's correct.
And if the heart is not beating, there won't be a rhythm, will there?
That's correct.
Okay. You checked for a pulse while you're there, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Were you able to detect any?
I was not.
When you saw her at the scene, can you describe her physical condition in layman's terms so that the jury can understand it?
She seemed to be a petite 20-year-old female, somewhat of an athletic build. I mean, she looked to be in good health.
At that particular time?
As far as her physical build goes, yes.
Okay.
Meaning she didn't appear to be malnourished or anything like that.
As far as her medical condition, how would you describe that to the jury?
Extremely poor. She had no heartbeat, she had no pulse, she was not making any voluntary respiratory effort, and she was unresponsive to any stimuli.
Anything to indicate to you she was anything but dead?
Nothing.
Now, was she given any type of shots or IVs or anything like that?
We continued CPR until we got her down to the truck, which was 3 flights of stairs. Once we got her down there, an IV was established, and we administered a round of epinephrine and a round of atropine. These are two drugs that we give in order to try to stimulate the heart, stimulate electrical activity back to the heart, irritate the muscle, if you will, to make it return to a spontaneous beat.
And were those efforts successful in any way?
There was no change in the patient's status after the drugs were administered.
Okay. Do you remember when she was removed from the bedroom?
Yes, sir.
And on that particular, what were you doing at that particular time, if anything?
I was, like I said, she'd been intubated, so I was just concerned with maintaining that intubation, making sure it stayed patent, and I was breathing for her at that time.
Okay. Now, she was loaded up in an ambulance. Was it one that you transported her, or was somebody else who transported her?
No, it was one I transported her in.
Okay. And what did you do as far as transporting her to the hospital? What activities did you perform?
I believe a firefighter rode along with me, and right before we left is when we established the IV and when we gave the drugs. Soon after that, James got up front to drive. Myself and another firefighter were in the back. The firefighter continued CPR. I continued to breathe for her. We put her on the heart monitor, which is a much more advanced version of the AED. When we hooked her up to the heart monitor, I can see if there is any electrical activity of the heart, and there was none. To put it in layman's terms, all I saw was a flat line.
Was there a report generated by your department?
Yes, sir.
And I'll show you, it looked like 4 pages, but, and you probably cannot read it, but I'll ask you if you can recognize the format of it.
Yes, sir.
Okay, I don't know if you can read the name at the top, but it says Clantina Stewart.
Yes, sir.
And does that appear to be the report that was generated from your department based on what actions that you and your people took?
Yes, sir.
And is a 4-page report, is that correct?
That's correct.
Well, we'd like to make that an exhibit.
That would be exhibit 14.
If I could have 1 second, Judge.
Sure.
Now, those are my questions.
Okay, questions, Mr. Grant? Any questions from our jurors? Not seeing any, thanks, we can step back. Please stay in the corner before you go. Who's next?